I'm Edie Fraser, and extremely grateful and humbled for all of you, for the 250 business executive and collaborative sponsors that are joining us today for the Women's Business Collaborative Executive Roundtable Series with Zoom Learning. CEOs leading in crisis. There's a groundswell to learn, to collaborate, digital collaboration and sharing. Women Business Collaborative is truly proud in building a movement together to change the numbers of women as CEOs, C-suite boards, entrepreneurship, and capital, with an accelerator to parity and support of diversity, with amazing commitment to achieve results, and work together with an intense dedication. Yes, faster together. Our call today represents 36 women partner organizations and so many from our board, our advisory and leaders councils and sponsors, all of you who are responsible for driving change. And as was said earlier this morning, out of box leading, which is absolutely crucial. Because of collaboration, we're not going to be stopped for achieving goals and leaving a legacy of results, coupled with a generosity of spirit and action. You are action leaders and champion, yet we're swept up in this time of economic and health upheaval. The unprecedented nature of the coronavirus pandemic has truly spawned great economic and social disruption, and it's going to live for a long time as a paradigm shift of the global economic order and ways workers are deployed and supply chains changed. The effectiveness in which CEOs pivot their organizations in this environment will surely impact business viability and reputations. Great CEOs stand up with their employees, their customers, their suppliers, their boards, their shareholders, and communities. We want to hear these voices today, and what legends today, from CEO champion like Carly, that was the first woman Fortune 500 CEO and has been so committed to not only women, but Corona, and the others in retail, insurance, private prisons, and also with super financial PR that impacts boards of directors and all leaders. To introduce this session now are two chairs, Robert Reiss and Becky Schombell. They're special. Robert Reiss is CEO, as you know, of the CEO Forum and one of the most WBC committed board directors, has the largest magazine, radio show, podcast for CEOs. And this broadcast will be summarized by Robert for Forbes. Becky Schombell is a CEO of SHAMBAUGH. She chairs our WBC speakers and is an internationally recognized expert for thousands of leaders about change. So with that, on this special day with over 200 people now on the call, we turn this over, starting with Becky and then to Robert, and are just grateful. Becky?
Thank you. Thank you, Edie, and thank you for everyone for joining. And Edie, I want to thank you for your inspiration and vision around WBC and creating the space for all of us to really collaborate and hear from some great thought partners and leaders on not only navigating through this crisis, but how do we plan for the future? What does that look like, and how do we start preparing now? So in the spirit of collaboration, I think this is a great kickoff. This is our first CEO roundtable, and there'll be more, which Edie will wrap up and tell you what's next. But I want to just cover a few just administrative things. I'm sure all of you have done Zoom or any kind of a telepresence before, but there is a chat box at the bottom of your screen. We unfortunately, because of the tight 1 hour, won't be able to answer any questions Q&A, but please provide not only your questions, we'll try to respond to those later, but any feedback or input that you have that would be helpful for our next roundtable as well. Also, you can also change the view to see your speaker. So just scroll down to the top right of your video screen and click on the square, and that'll allow you to see each speaker that's joining us today. Also, one final note, please join us. We're pushing this out and live tweeting after this event by going to hashtag #WBC Faster Together. So let's get started. Robert, great to join you and partner with you on this forum. And what I'd like to do before we get started is just do a quick brief intro. Edie, I think you set the foundation for the terrific slate of speakers that we have today that cover a broad spectrum of different industries. So I think the cognitive diversity and ideas and perspectives will be rich. And we intentionally had this diversity of people so we get a new lens on how they are leading in uncertain times. So I wanted to introduce first Deirdre Quinn. Many of you, I'm sure, if not all of you, have heard of Lafayette Clothesline. It's a national, actually international brand, recognized for women's clothing for over 30 plus years. Now, Deirdre, I may not have gotten it, it may have been more than 30 years. But in your business, when orders have been canceled, inventories have skyrocketed, and the marketplace has been extremely uncertain like these times. Deirdre, which is amazing, has successfully reinvented her organization through her relentless passion, her vision, and entrepreneurialism. So we'll hear more about that. Theresa White, thank you for joining. Teresa is president of the American Family Life Insurance Company. And when I researched that, I remember you as AFLAC, right? That's a great brand. But AFLAC now has been in business in the United States since 1955. And Teresa is responsible for creating the vision and the strategic plan and execution of that across the Americas. She too has led real times of crisis and uncertainty in the industry and with AFLAC. And I think one of her pillars or foundation for leading in uncertain times is ensuring that they develop the talent and the asset of tap on the diversity of ideas to really navigate through uncertain times of crisis. So thank you, Teresa. Damon Henniger is the president of and CEO of CoreCivic. Now, if you haven't heard of them, which I actually had not, but they've been in business for over several decades, in fact, 3 decades. And they're the organization that really supports our nation's infrastructure in terms of prison and detention management. And what I love about Damon's personal mission and passion is to ensure that when those individuals that come in have the same or great opportunity to re-enter into society. So we'll hear more from Damon on that and how they're dealing during these times of crisis. Carly Fiorina, I know Edie, you had briefly announced Carly. Carly, welcome. We're very happy to have you here. Chairman of Carly Fiorina Enterprises. As Edie said, notable, Carly was the first woman to run a Fortune 50 organization, which is significant. When Carly was recruited to lead HP in 1999, the industry was facing the worst technology recession in 25 years. Under Carly's leadership, revenue grew, innovation tripled, growth quadrupled, and HP became the 11th largest company in the United States. Carly has also been a true leader, but also has been a leader in the political arena and also in the nonprofit world. Thank you, Carly, for joining us. Joele Frank is the managing partner of Joele Frank, Wilkinson, which is a firm for navigating through crisis. Her firm is the company that people go to get that expert advice. And I think it's safe to say, and we'll probably hear much more from Joele, that communication has a huge impact on how organizations not only navigate the current crisis, but how they get on the other side and instill and sustain their reputation within society and in the industry. So that's a brief introduction. As you can see, we have a wonderful slate of speakers. Robert, I'm going to turn it over to you and kick it off for our first interview.
Well, thank you, Becky. And welcome, everyone. Our first speaker, that's Deirdre Quinn, is a truly great entrepreneur. And she's won awards from, the Best Entrepreneur Award from E&Y. But really, when you look at Lafayette 148, here's what's amazing. I want to start off and ask you, so you're in the tripod of the hotspots in the world. Your product comes from Italy, manufactured in China, and you've stores all over China as well as the world. But then your offices are in New York City and Brooklyn. So you have the most challenging situations in 3 of your areas. How do you manage this?
Oh, you got to go fast if you're in the fashion business, because we're just used to change. So it started for us in January when the factory shut down, and all the stores in China shut down. We saw it coming. Then the mills shut down in Italy, and then the shoe manufacturers shut down in Spain, and then it got here and everything shut down. So the company honestly is now projected to be 50% of what it was planned to be. So the only thing that I can do is just adapt and deal with the change and reorganize the company and figure out, I feel like a wartime CEO. So I think it's perfect that I'm in the Brooklyn Navy Yard because they've already been through some wars. And that's how it feels. But, it's all about a team and a culture and leadership. I am positive that there's a silver lining to what's going on here. So, it's time for us. Well, first we started making gowns. We wanted to do something to help back. So for the hospitals, the yard came to us and asked us to make gowns. So, you can imagine here we are trying to run a fashion company, develop a new collection, and it's something you can't do from home. It's not a spreadsheet, it's not a Zoom, it's talented people. And at the same time, the pattern makers are making gowns for the hospitals. So, it's sort of a little bit of how art works. You just have to keep adapting and changing and evolving. And so I'm doing it.
What were the conversations like early on with your team as this started to evolve? How did you engage them?
We got on it early because China warned us what was coming. And, from the beginning, we were the first ones to have your temperature checked.
And you're actually in Wuhan, correct?
We had a store in Wuhan, which is now open. The factory was in Shantou, and the factory's back open and 95% capacity. The problem is reversed now. We can't give them the work that they need because all of our orders got canceled. I mean, everybody just panicked, and I understand why, and they canceled everything that we made for them. So we're sitting on inventory levels. We're just, had a furlough, and it was something that I really didn't want to do. And after I furloughed 50% of my company, I got the calls. We'll work for free. We want to be here when we come out. That's what a company culture does. And I do believe as an entrepreneur, I started this company to be an entrepreneur, to be vertical, to own our own factory. And I'm not giving up on my dreams. We just have to rebuild a new version of, and we'll probably come out better because I think every company, sees things. We saw the department stores were becoming less and less important. Traffic was down. We set up a catalog in 2009. When that happened, thank God, that's 40% of our business. We're now focusing on how we're not reliant upon other people, how we have to get to our consumer directly. So there's a lot of things you can take a moment and re-envision your company for the future.
Let's talk about leadership. And you've built, and we've spoken a lot of times, that you have a great woman leadership team, and that there are differences in how women lead to how men lead. Just from an entrepreneurial standpoint, although you're still an entrepreneur, although you're a really large beloved brand, what are those differences, and what is the secret of women in leadership, especially in challenging times like these?
I think I learned it from my mother. It's multitasking. We have to do a lot of things at the same time. And I just believe women were just good at that. And, I'm fearless. Like, to me, I'm an optimist, So this problem becomes, well, how do we solve it? You know, I feel like Houdini with the chains on in the water, and you just have to get out. And, you know, I know people count on you. You know, my team counts on me. You know, my customers count on me. I think that you know, we just, you know, we're honest. I think as an organization, you know, people trust that if I say we're going to be okay, then we're going to be okay.
So you have to be so careful in what you say because everyone is listening right there.
Right. You know, look, you know, you build something over 24 years and it becomes like a part of who you are. And we're privately owned. We don't have outside funding. So now it is, how do you protect what you've built and rebuild it? And you know, I think that women in general, we have a compassion to work together. I mean, we're 70% women-run company. We're a women-owned company. We're women dressing women. We sort of, you know, it's a beautiful spot to be in.
So let's talk about things like funding. You're privately held. You were successful in getting PPP, right?
We did. We got it on Monday.
Congratulations. And your advice to anyone, if there are entrepreneurs out there who are trying to get PPP loans, any advice quickly on that?
Sure. I think it's really hard. I think the new funding will help. You know, the Navy Yard is taking all of these little companies, because the Navy Yard is an entrepreneurial, you know, startup area, and they're even grouping companies together and helping them. So you have to reach out for help. You know, I have a fabulous CFO, and, you know, one of the things I've learned is he's become such an important player in the company. You know, he's not just a numbers guy, he knows the business, but he also, you know, he got the job done for us. And it was critical that we got that funding, critical. Otherwise you can't keep the company together.
Yeah, so you are, like you said, you are really an optimist. And, you know, when we've spoken, you just say, well, there's a silver lining and we're going to make this happen and we're all in this together. Talk about, what do you think business will be like? The first thing is, you actually told me, share how clothing and fashion will change post-pandemic, but then talk about post-pandemic.
You know, I definitely feel that people will be more cautious about how they go out and shop, and we're going to have to change probably appointment only. We're going to slowly get back into it. There'll be limited store hours. There'll be things that you know that are different. The way the customer dresses will change. We think she'll probably want to be more comfortable, maybe slightly casual. We see it in what's selling right now online. You know, knitwear has become important. Comfortable pants are important. You know, I really think that we'll all come out of this different. I think custom for us will become important. Getting direct to the consumer. You know, we're looking into that business model right now. You know, we want to reinvent ourselves. I mean, I think we're 24 years old, and I look at what's the next 24 years for us. And this will always be sort of a turning moment in what is the future Lafayette.
Yeah, and you know, you are one to definitely take on challenge, and when you see it, you'll go for it. I mean, one of the amazing things is your brand is Lafayette 128. That was your address. To move away from a brand, just throw in, how do you do something? What goes through your thought process to change your whole brand?
You know, well, a lot of people didn't even realize it was a street address, and the rent was crazy. I mean, we were paying like $90 a foot, because Chinatown turned into Soho over those 24 years. So, you know, because we're private and I wanted to reinvest in opening stores on Madison Avenue and Manhasset, Long Island, moving to the Navy Yard was a third of the rent. So you could reinvest that money somewhere else. A lot of people told me fashion companies cannot exist outside of New York. Well, you know what? They do. If you give great product, people find you. They come here. They've never been to Brooklyn. You know, that was the reason we came, but what we got out of it was so much better than that. We were able to go from 7 floors in a building to 1 floor of 70,000 square feet. So the efficiency of the people working together, the silos went away. And I think now, you know, there's still silos. Companies have silos. My mission these last 6 weeks that I've been here by myself is, how do I break down the silos? How do we come back stronger and make it better?
Dee, time is pretty much up, I'm seeing, but I have one final question. One sentence on your advice to entrepreneurs in managing through this.
Don't ever give up on your passion. Just stay focused, and you know, you'll get out of it.
There you have it. Well, Deirdre, thank you so much. Carry on. And I hope you do go into men's clothing and braces, even though they're going more casual.
Don't worry, I have a few good men's sweaters in my closet.
So now we're up to our next speaker, and this looks like Theresa White. How are you, Teresa?
I'm wonderful. I want to make sure Deirdre knows that I have on Lafayette 148.
Thank you.
I'm a fan.
Thank you.
So, Deirdre, we heard from entrepreneurship. Now, Teresa is representing corporations, and actually AFLAC, we'll talk later, but it's one of the most beloved corporations anywhere. And you were actually given the assignment by Dan, the CEO globally and chairman, amazing guy, to be the field general of COVID-19. Just what have you been learning through this whole process?
Well, first of all, thank you to WBC for the invite. And let me tell you, there's so much to learn. You know, many people talk about making sure you don't waste a crisis without learning something, and that's so important. Like Deirdre said, one of the things that we've learned is really looking at what was going on in Japan. We were able to see some things happening in Japan that helped us to then start looking at what we might need to do here in the US. And so we have, you know, a business continuity team here, and like many other corporations do, and a crisis management team that pulls together various teams across the organization to help us to manage the crisis situation. And so what I did is really pulled out our crisis management team and started exercising. We created a war room. A lot of times we would have what we call tabletop exercises for crises. And we did not have a tabletop exercise for a pandemic of this scale. However, you can glean from and learn from some of the things that you've had to deal with in the past to make sure that you're addressing the crisis. So we, you know, never could have predicted the COVID scenario, but we have business continuity plans. We had to look at our capital and liquidity to make sure that we could meet our obligations, specifically our claims, because it's game time for every insurance company, and we wanted to make sure that we would be able to fulfill all of the promises that we make each and every day to our policyholders when they pay for their coverages. The other thing I'll say is, from a communication standpoint, a big part of what we had to do is make sure that we were plugged into the right places to get the right information to make the decisions that we needed to make. And those places were, like, for instance, the CDC. Johns Hopkins has become a reliable source for us so that we have the right information and we can make the right decisions.
Let's talk about leadership during crisis. Well, before we do, quick question. Were there any like mistakes or things you went through and you say, oh gosh, why did I do that? Or I'm just imagining?
Well, I will say this. There are three things that I was talking to our teams about, and I say this, they're very important: communication, continuity, and culture. And I think on the communication piece, we knew what our priorities were: our employees, our community, our policyholders. And so we had that one down. Our continuity, we had the business continuity plans. We knew what we were doing there. Culture, is a huge part of where people get it wrong. And you can't start a culture in a crisis. When you start the culture, your culture needs to happen outside of the crisis. And so I tell leaders all the time, you make sure that you're treating your employees right, that you're doing all the things that you need to do for your employees. Take care of the employees, they'll take care of the business. And you've got to make sure that you are doing that outside of the crisis. Otherwise, within the crisis, you have no one to help you. You have no one to help see you through that crisis.
So what do people do now? Let's say if they don't have the culture right, how do you manage that, Teresa?
Well, I will tell you, if you don't have if you don't have that right from a culture perspective, you have a very hard road as a leader, because leadership, is a team sport. Leadership, I think John Maxwell said that one who thinks he leads, but has no followers, is taking a walk. And I truly believe that is, you have got to make sure that you have people who are with you. Otherwise, it just becomes harder. It's just a harder activity to do. You get a lot of very negative feedback in that case.
So I want to talk more about then the leadership model that makes for a great corporation. I don't know if everyone realizes, but everything about AFLAC, it's one of the top companies in the world and everything. So most ethical company, like 14 years in a row. Black enterprise, best diversity, 12 years in a row. 20 years in a row, best 100 companies to work for. So, and you and I have spoken, you said, well, I've never had challenges being a woman, being a Black woman, because I've never experienced that. We have an amazing company. What is at the core that AFLAC does that other corporations can learn from?
I think we treat our people with respect and care. That's number one. I think we also ensure that people are heard. We don't always agree with everything that everybody says, but we make sure that people are heard. And 67% of our employees are women. And so there's a lot of empathy. There's a lot of making sure that we take care of not only the business, but take care of the employee base, because that employee base is really what sustains us. And I think the scariest part of, we have 98% of our people working from home right now. And, if you carry that forward and think about what this might look like, the scariest part for me is losing the culture, because bringing someone in that type of culture means that they don't have the same opportunities that we had to get to know each other, to form relationships. And so it's really, this pandemic has really had me thinking about how we approach the business in a different way.
So let's then do the fast forward. And I don't want you to speak for AFLAC, but speak for corporations in general of how you think this pandemic will play out. And one of my good friends told me that failure is only failure if you don't learn from failure. So moving forward, what do you think the recipe for success, and what is the recipe for success for women moving forward in corporations? So post-pandemic, everything works in a more positive way.
Well, I'll say this from a woman's perspective. Women in leadership tend to be very strong, very passionate, and most of all, very empathetic. And I think in a crisis situation, it serves us well. I'm quick to say women lead from the heart, and men lead from the head. And I think you need both in an organization. And it doesn't say that one doesn't have something else, but it just says you know, when you lead from the heart and there's a crisis, then people are readily listening to you and will readily follow, versus someone who is leading from the head and not bringing others with them. And so that's a benefit from a woman's perspective. But when I think about post-pandemic and where we're needing to go here, you know, a lot of, we're receiving a lot of feedback from our employees. We have a website called My AFLAC Experience. And on the website, employees talk about all sorts of things. And one thing they were talking about, because we're in Georgia, they are concerned about the current lifting of some of the orders here in Georgia, and concerned about, you know, oh my gosh, are we going to have to come back to work? And so I recently as this morning, told our HR person that I wanted him to send out a letter to let them know kind of where our stance is. And it's simple. We are going to only return to work when it is safe and we can do so responsibly. We have people who are caring for their parents. We have people who have young children. We have people, I mean, my mother is here with me from Texas because I wanted her to be closer so I can keep eyes on her. At the end of the day, I think the lesson that we learn, and the thing that I think women should take from this is, don't be afraid to lead from the heart. You can still be strong. You can still be passionate about what you do. But we will not go back into our site until we have specific triggers that tell me that things are better. You know, and when we go back, we will start in a phased approach. It'll be 25% will go back, but certain triggers have to be met for certain actions to happen. And we basically put together a plan for 25%, 50%, 75%, and then 100%. But quite frankly, from where I sit today, I don't think that we'll ever be 100% based on how we left. I think we will probably carve out a percentage of our people, and those people will work from home forever, should they want to do so, because it just makes sense.
And there you have it. I'm hearing, Edie, time is up. Teresa, excellent. Lead from the heart and focus on culture. Becky, handing it back over to you. Oh, there you go. All yours, Becky.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for those great insights from the speakers. Damon, I would love to bring you forward and talk about managing this particular pandemic. And the first question I guess I would have is how, you know, I think one of the more recent crises that we remember is 2008, the financial crisis. So if you look at these times, how is this crisis different than the 2008 financial crisis?
Well, Becky, thank you for that question. Let me first say to the WBC, thank you so much for having me. I am really honored to be a part of the panel, and I look at the other four panelists here. I'm grateful to be on the same list with these other four individuals. So thank you. Really, really appreciate it. I would say to your question, one key difference is, you know, it's affected us operationally in a pretty meaningful way, with it being a virus versus in the 2008, 2009 Great Recession. It was more just managing liquidity and the balance sheet and just making sure that we've got ample capital go through that period of time. So obviously we're thinking about that too, thinking about liquidity and thinking about the balance sheet and kind of capital needs the next 24 months, but also how it impacts our people, our employees that work in our 70+ facilities around the country, about 15,000 employees, and then the 60,000 inmates or detainees that are in our facilities. So that's goal number one, just making sure that we're maintaining their safety and their security during this period of time and how this virus impacts them and their facilities.
So, well, thank you for that. And you know, I think about your organization, a lot of companies everybody's working at home, right, to the executive team, but I would think that your team is all hands on deck, right, in the detention centers and the prison. Is that right? I mean, I don't think they can do this virtually.
Exactly right. So we're a 24/7 operation, and And so the good news for us, if there is good news, is that we always have to be battle ready. And so I think Deirdre made a comment earlier about being a wartime CEO. That's exactly the way I'm thinking about it too. And with that, you know, we have to be very nimble when we have a flood or a hurricane that affects our facilities, or unfortunately, sometimes we have maybe an outbreak of mumps or chickenpox, whatever. So we've got to be able to kind of deal with that operational complexity when these things happen. And again, being 24/7, our employees have to come into work every day. And so understanding that we've got the policies and the processes in place, that we've got the leadership at the national level to give direction as appropriate, but also making sure that our employees feel safe. They feel comfortable coming in because obviously they're thinking about not only their own personal safety, but coming home at night with family and friends being impacted with this virus. And so taking all into account is very, very important during this period of time.
Of course. And you've been with CoreCivic for some time. I guess, given this pandemic and the ripple effect of this, how has that impacted your leadership? I'm curious. And maybe personally, how are you dealing with that in a 24/7? And, you know, how has that impacted how you're leading others? Just curious about that.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, I've been with the company about 28, 29 years. I've been CEO about 10 years. And I guess the first thing I'd answer to your question is, and this is important all the time, not just in peacetime or wartime, as we talked about earlier, but that is just listening and your communication skills. So you really have to take it up several notches in this period of time to not only be able to communicate effectively, but be a very active listener, because you're going to get a lot of warning lights that are blaring, that's right in your face, but there's a few that maybe are in your blind spot. And so I think you gotta ask questions, you gotta engage folks, and obviously that makes it a challenge when we're all kind of working remotely here within our headquarters. You know, the other thing is that for me personally as a leader, I've had to take it up a notch relative to decision making. So we've made some decisions. Notably, we gave all of our employees nationwide what we call a hero bonus. It's a $500 bonus that'll be paid before July 1st. We made that decision in hours versus typically, a decision like that. Other decision we made is giving people more PTO during this period of time. Those are decisions in kind of normal times you do in a month or two. You think through the unintended consequences. You try to figure out the FAQs for your employees and your HR professionals. We did it within days. And so having the ability to make decisions and think quickly of the unintended consequences is really, really important. And it's a tension I'm feeling as a leader right now, to making sure we make the right decisions, but we make them very quickly.
And I'm just kind of curious, because in this, you have to be decisive, right? But I think you also have to get the information, the facts, and then there's so much information. It's coming from all different directions, and I've heard this from many executives and CEOs. How do you filter all this data information to make an informed decision? Any advice there?
It's a great question. So yeah, like the other four panelists, my inbox has probably tripled here in the last 30 days, and I've got phone calls, I've got people checking in, I've got board members who obviously they want to get more frequent updates on what we're doing kind of near term. So I think you got to recalibrate your kind of work kind of life balance, but also recalibrate those times where you can have some quiet time, you can reflect, you can think, you can read, and get the ability to kind of digest all this incoming you got coming in, because you got so much data coming in from the internal stakeholders, but so much information coming in from external stakeholders, and it's really important information. So like my four colleagues here in the panel, I'm trying to figure out and try to understand what's going on in the outside world, not just with the virus and the advice that we want to give from a kind of protection and a safety perspective, but also how do we think about compensation? How do we think about PTO? How do we think about health benefits? How are people thinking about liquidity and balance sheet and dividends, stuff like that? So being able to kind of recalibrate where you can take that stuff in, digest it, see how it's applicable for your business to where you can make you more effective in decision making is really, really important. So I think you got to first take that to account and kind of recalibrate to where you do have those times to turn everything else off and just kind of reflect and digest.
Well, you made a really good point. What I inferred from this, that you have a rich stakeholder of thought partners that you can reach out to within and outside of CoreCivic, right? And sometimes what got us here is not going to get us there. So continuing to refresh that. And I noticed, and I just wanted to share, if you don't mind, that I think you're about 50% gender parity and that of diversity. Would you agree? Is that pretty much correct?
That's correct. Absolutely, that's correct. Yeah, that's exactly right. And we've got 11 directors on our board, and we're about 30% with women on our board too. So that's right. And leadership also has got good representation of women.
Yeah. So while women are important, I think it's the mix, right? It's the balance of cognitive diversity. It's the balance of your thought partners. It's looking at this complicated issue and different ways to make a decision, right? So how has that diversity of thought around the table and across your team really benefited you and CoreCivic and those that you serve, right? How has that benefited overall through these times?
I think Teresa made a comment earlier, and I absolutely agree. And that's allowing to have more empathy in the leadership team. So having the ability not only to kind of digest again the information we're getting internally and say, okay, we need to understand how this is impacting the people entrusted our care, how is this impacting our employees, but also maybe things that are in our blind spot. I think having the empathy there and just saying, hey, you know, I can appreciate the people in our organization. They're thinking again about their loved ones at home. They're maybe dealing with children that are out of school and stuff like that. So I think having that ability to have that empathy, and then with that, how do we maybe help deal with people that are dealing with not only the fear, doubt, and uncertainty, not only in the general labor market, but in our case with employees coming in, the fear of working in a setting where this virus is so prevalent, and obviously concerns about their own personal safety. So I think being empathetic is so important in this type of environment.
And I'm curious, has that, there's been an intellectual conversation around empathetic cultures, emotional. We say, yes, we'll do this, but we're going to have to do it when we have more time, right? I mean, we hear this a lot as at a leadership consulting practice, or we look at inclusion and gender equity and such in our firm. But do you think in this round, people see the value of an empathetic leader, of an empathetic culture? Do you think it might stick more? I know that that's part of your DNA within your organization, right? But do you think it's going to stick more? And if so, what are some pieces of advice for us to ensure that as we come on the other end of this, we don't just go back to the execution side of it?
Yeah, I agree 100%. So, I think Deirdre made a comment, or maybe Teresa too, about being kind of the internal optimist. That I'm absolutely that way, and I think you got to be that as a leader, is be optimistic and give folks in the organization the ability to see through the tough times, that there's better days ahead. But I think it will stick. But I think the opportunity as leaders, all of us now going through another round of being in a challenge or in a crisis, to make sure that the culture is right where it does stick, that it is part of the DNA of the company going forward. And we not only reinforce that internally, but just making sure new people that come to the organization, that's part of the culture, and that's what we expect. And if it doesn't fit with kind of your value system, then maybe it's not the right for them individually.
Right. And I think that's why you are able to draw, your organization is able to draw such rich diversity, and they stay, right? So
right.
Culture, again, is a key theme, I think, in these dialogues today. The one last question I have, I mean, what you learned from the prior crisis, what you're doing now, but I think this creates pause when we go through types of crisis, right? And where this is a time when we can be more creative, look at new ideas of approaching things, and also those things that we wanted to do, what were some part of your vision, or our vision as executives leading our organizations. We're taking time to punctuate that, to put more intention around that. Maybe it's an expansion of portfolio of services. Maybe it's how we go to market. Maybe it's our customers and our members. Maybe they look a little bit different. So let's look at a way to create a reach to them. What do you think is the biggest opportunity for you, and actually within the industry here, to take advantage of this time to actually come out better, to plan for the future?
Yeah, great question. I'd highlight two things. There's several things. We've got a team that's working alongside us to think about the kind of mid to long-term impacts for the company, and we'll digest that and debrief on that at the appropriate time. But I'll give you a couple quick examples, one of which is, and this is an obvious example, and that is, how do we think about the construction of our facilities going forward? So we've got some of the newest, most modern facilities in the country, but obviously you're hearing real challenges on facilities that are severely overcrowded, that are 100 years old, that don't have modern HVAC or other systems. And having that density and overcrowding obviously creates a real challenge when you got a crisis like we have in hand here with COVID-19. That's one. The second is our industry has been a little behind what I'd say other industries from a technology perspective. Notably, the ability for inmates or detainees to communicate effectively with their families has traditionally been done through what you could consider like a payphone. But it's been real interesting to me about how we could use tablets and maybe other devices to not only do text and chats and video conferences and communications, but also deliver program data to individuals in our care where maybe our traditional classroom settings had to be closed because of this crisis. So I think that's an opportunity where we can kind of fast forward and bring that into our system because of this crisis. So an opportunity where you can bring those things that you're kind of in your vision, but for whatever reason, you just can't quite get there as quick as you want. Maybe that's an opportunity for us because we've helped about 30,000 inmates in the last 5 years get their high school diploma or GED through a traditional classroom setting. Maybe we can accelerate that now with the use of technology and also the ability where we've got this disruption from a historical program perspective.
Thank you, Damon. I think you reinforced that. I think now is the time those companies that come at them are stronger. Take advantage of these opportunities, right? To be innovative, leverage their talent and their technology. So thank you for that. And I know we need to close on this and we could spend much more time, but thank you so much, Damon. I want to turn it over to Robert now to interview for Carly.
Thanks so much, Becky. And hi, Carly, how are you?
I'm well, Robert. How are you? And thanks so much to everybody at WBC. I'm honored to be with the other panelists.
Well, you know what's interesting? When you said we're going to welcome Carly, you're like Madonna. You're one of the few people you just say Carly, everyone knows who it is.
Well, no comment.
So let's start off. Let's talk about crisis because Carly, you and I have spoken before, and you have been through probably more in terms of major crisis. Just walk through the crises you've been through and how this ties into that and what your take on this pandemic is.
Well, when I arrived at Hewlett-Packard, we were at the top of the dot-com boom and we crashed to the bottom of the dot-com bust very soon after my arrival, which meant, a 30, 35, 40% drop in revenues and customer base and stock price. So of course there's a similarity there. We went through 9/11, a massive unexpected shock that changed everything. We went through SARS. I've led a nonprofit through Ebola, the financial crisis in 2008. All crises have some similarities in that actually there always are warnings ahead of time. And usually we've ignored those warnings. It is true with the coronavirus as well. Actually, there was quite a bit of warning. And that's maybe something we should come back to. But the other thing that's true in every crisis is that leadership matters. In good times, in easy times, you can kind of tread water without it. But in the tough times, leadership is vital.
So let's talk about tough times. We look at someone like Abe Lincoln and the tough challenges he went through probably allowed his leadership to emerge. You talk a lot about courage and things like that. What is your take on what a leader has to do and how they have to face when they're in such a challenging situation?
Well, it's interesting. There's an old saying, tough times build character. And I actually think that's wrong. I think tough times reveal character. They reveal, for example, the character of a company, AKA its culture. They reveal the character of a leader. And I think what tough times reveal, honestly, with regard to leadership is whether or not someone actually is a leader. It's easy to get confused in the good times, but a leader, for example, in a tough time, it's revealed that a true leader serves. They don't preside, they serve. A real leader doesn't pass the buck. They don't run from the hot potato. A real leader runs to the problem and they problem solve. Service and problem solving are the purpose of leadership. A real leader, it's revealed in the tough times, collaborates. collaborates because they are empathetic, as so many of the other speakers have spoken so eloquently about, but also because they're humble. They understand they don't know it all, they can't do it all, they need help. So a real leader collaborates effectively, always, with expected people and unexpected people. And finally, I guess I would say tough times reveal the courage to make the tough choices, the courage to tell the truth, the courage to speak the truth, the courage to take the criticism that comes along with acting on the truth, because as all leaders know, whatever decision you make, someone won't like it. And you have to be able to stand up to that criticism. And just one more thing, and your other speakers have spoken to it, so I want to punctuate it. Leaders develop what I would call peripheral vision. You know, we talk a lot about strategic vision, the ability to look ahead, but sometimes strategic vision, honestly, is actually tunnel vision. Peripheral vision is the ability to look around and see what's going on around you. It's how you heed warning signs. It's how you build relationships. It's how you take on board different points of view.
Where do you get your information from as a leader? What are the
Yes, well, and
you are the one speaker
everybody's
who
overwhelmed.
has global. You have a complete global perspective on everything.
Yeah, it's part of what we all struggle with as leaders, that one can become overwhelmed by information. And so I think an incredibly important skill that leaders have to develop, and all effective leaders have, is the skill to separate the wheat from the chaff. There's a ton of data out there. There's a ton of information out there. Not all of it is essential. And part of what happens to us in this age of social media is we just get inundated with BS. We get inundated with stuff that seems so urgent, and in truth, it's completely irrelevant. And so understanding what's actually core to my mission, to my problem, to my culture, to my customers, to my employees, what's actually essential that I understand, and what is just a bunch of BS, making those distinctions is really important.
Post-pandemic, how do you think the world will change?
Well, I happen to be an optimist as well, as are your other great panelists. And my hope is that post-pandemic, we will learn some of these really basic lessons. And I would say there are many lessons, but I just want to highlight three. Number one, leadership matters. I think we've gotten really confused about leadership. And I think we've got a lot of people in positions of leadership who aren't leaders and who aren't going to become leaders. And so we need to remember what leadership actually is. It's not your position or your title. It's your character and your impact. Secondly, I hope the lesson we all have learned is that we are all connected in incredibly important ways. It's not just customers and employees that are connected, but it's global connections. We can't any longer believe that out of sight should be out of mind. How we handle the health of our prison population, just to refer to your last great speaker, impacts the health of us all. The fact that we have migrant workers that a lot of us don't think about who are picking our food and caring for our sick and slaughtering our meat impacts all of us. We're all connected, and that has policy implications, and it also has implications, obviously, for our organizations. And the third thing that I hope we will remember is that it's critically important to lengthen our view. We have gotten so short-term focused, and it's easy to get short-term focused in the good times. It's easy for companies to just care about the short-term stock price, and so they spend all their cash on a stock buyback instead of putting it aside for a rainy day. It's easy for all of us, even our families, let's spend every dime instead of putting some away. We have to lengthen our view so that we're prepared for tough times, because they always come. They always come. And also so that in these tough times, we don't forget our future goals. We don't forget our ambitions. We don't forget the things that we've been working towards. because remembering those goals and doubling down on those goals is incredibly important, especially in the tough times.
Final question for you, Carly. So you and I have spoken. I mean, I've had the goal for years of us having 50 Fortune 500 women CEOs. You were the first Fortune 50. We're hovering in the 30s now. It's like 6.5%. What is stopping this from happening in your advice to women?
Well, first I'm going to give advice to not just women, but to men too, because it won't change unless men also believe it needs to change. I think people have good intentions. We spend $8 billion a year in corporate America on diversity and inclusion training. $8 billion a year, it's a huge amount of money. And yet, to your point, the statistics haven't changed as much as they should have. Not in any way, not in terms of women, not in terms of people of color, not in terms of people who are just different. And so why is that? I think it's because we don't actually understand that this is necessary. It's not a nice to do. It's not the right thing to do. Yes, it is the right thing to do. It's necessary to do for all the reasons we've been talking about, because the data is crystal clear. If you get more women, your returns are better. If you get a diverse set of people around the table, your decisions are better. The data is just crystal clear, and yet apparently we haven't internalized it, because as you and I have talked about, there are still more CEOs named James or John than there are women CEOs in the Fortune 500. So what is it that holds us back? I think it's this. We're all more comfortable with people like us. We're all more comfortable with people like us. And the impact of that is that the people who are at the table and in the room tend to stay at the table and in the room because they look for people who look like them, because they're comfortable with people like them. And so that's why men have to understand that looking for someone that you're comfortable with, that's just like you, is not in your interests. It is holding you back. It is holding your organization back. Diversity achieves better results. It's clear, the data's unmistakable. We need to get on with it now.
Carly, thank you for that. I see Edie clapping, and Becky, back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Robert and Carly. Joele, we're bringing you in the last fourth turn here, but again, I think you're going to pull some great threads of ideas and knowledge for us here. I mean, your business is about, helping organizations and boards in crisis, right? We'd love to hear from you how, we talked about how this crisis is different. Carly said there are a thread of things around crisis that are the same. But in your years of working in the middle of crisis with corporations and boards, how is this one different? And number two, what is the one piece of important advice that you're giving CEOs and boards as a result of that?
Well, because this one came on across the globe, this is pretty different in terms of both the quarantine that went into effect globally, and now what we're doing actually is we're hip deep in planning the reopening, and it's very complicated because it's global. It's got different aspects of employee safety. The communications challenges and the leadership challenges, as everyone's pointed out, are huge. And so the trust element of protection is major. So what we're doing right now is, of course, we're in the middle of earnings seasons. Most of my clients are in the public domain, and we're in the middle of earnings, and people are talking about, the financial aspects and what's going on, and the fact that they can't predict the future and things like that, which make a lot of sense. But behind the scenes, they're just beginning, and it's a beginning of how do we open up? What is different? What do we say? How do you do it? Who stays home? Who doesn't stay home? Can you work from home in a manufacturing organization? What's the architectural needs? What are the needs? What are you going to be doing? What's going on? And that's what we're dealing with right now.
So if you look at it, and I know you work with the diversity of corporations and boards, what do you envision in terms of just work structures? I know there's been a lot of talk about they won't be the same on the other side, right? So what are you hearing out there? What are you seeing, and how can we start preparing for that?
What's very interesting to me is how well most of the corporate structures worked remotely. Of course, you know, the tech guys, the tech people, you know, they've been doing it forever, and that really, you know, they were able to adapt very quickly. But those of us, and I'm one of them, you had told me in January 1st that my entire 153-person organization will be working from 150 locations, I would have said you were nuts, but we're doing it. And so that has been a big surprise to me. The tools, I mean, I've had to learn 5 of these different audio methods. I'm a Luddite in terms of tech, and so I'm able to pull it off, but there's 5 of them, and we're doing them across the board. That has helped. I think the bigger challenge is in the manufacturing end of things, and how safely, really safely, do we come back in manufacturing. You know, what do you do in the mailroom? What do you do in the snack room? What do you do where people will congregate? How do we handle it? Those are things that we're currently seeing as major challenges. And the other major challenges, of course, are the external challenges. What happens when people want to do M&A again, which, you know, after 2008, you know, between 2009 and 2011 and 12, there was a huge boom of friendly and not so friendly M&A. So I think people are looking around them to make sure that they have, well, one of the people said, backed up the truck to the bank and gotten as much cash available to them as possible to protect themselves. And also, what do we do to show that we did it right? Remember, I mean, Carly's very aware of it, others very aware of it. The ESG movement is not going to go away. It's going to be even stronger across in boardrooms and with the investor base. And they're going to demand that people have done things the right way, or there's going to be huge criticism. So leaders are very, very, very aware of, I think, people looking over their shoulder.
So obviously we're still building that plane, and we're building it as we go, and the other side will look different for sure. I think a key theme around this is leadership matters, as Carly said, and that's really the crown jewel, I think, of how we navigate through this. And everyone on this line today is in some kind of a leadership role, right? Culture that's been an institution for years. So as we navigate through this, in many corporations, you know, like Damon's, the culture is working for them, and Teresa at AFLAC. But how do you advise CEOs who realize they've had this wake-up call, you know, we do need to shift the culture? Are there any like top 2-3 pieces of advice you give them of where to start, how to do that?
Well, you know, culture is probably one of the basic value structures of a corporation, right? It builds from outside. But one of the things that I've noticed in the years that I've been in dealing with leaders in crisis is the CEO, at least in the public companies, the leadership matters. The internal and external push for culture, some of it is, you know, come up from the organization, but a lot of it comes from the top. So if the board, and one of the things Carly mentioned was men have to help, you know, there are men that are actually insisting that women get on board. So that's important right now. It's very important. A lot of the index funds are insisting that women come on boards. The 30% rule, whatever it is, Paradigm for Parity, which is a C200 organization, is trying to get the C-suite to be 30% women or parity in the C-suite by 2030. So we are partnering with the men to push it forward, and people with the votes, the voters, the investors, are helping to make that happen. And I believe the ESG movement, I think, is going to be even stronger at the end of this, to have corporations, you know, there's report cards on ESG. Some of them are a little crazy right now. It's a little new in the process. But as they develop and as they come out of it over time, people are paying attention. And so one of the things my clients know is that people are watching them to see how they go. And Carly was talking about, you know, being able to see broadly around, I say we need people to see around the corner. Most of the people who have the instinct to see around the corner are where we're going to be going. And those people have a tremendous, advantage, because they're able to, you know, they have the conviction of they have their approval of their own convictions. They see around corners and they act on it, and they pull in people who don't necessarily agree with them. They surround themselves not with people who necessarily just like them, but with people who challenge them and see what's going on, and they like the give and take. And that's what I'm seeing as what I believe will be the success of getting us through this unique experience.
Thank you for that, Joelle. And you know, in times of crisis and over the years, what I've noticed is that leaders come out of the woodwork that you didn't think were even in the organization. And you know, it's not always the executive team. And so I guess I'm inspired by the fact that we're encouraging those on the call today to find out ways that they can channel that broader vision, right? To bring different creative solutions and engage in critical problem solving, right? And I think while we don't want to separate men from women, but I think it's time for women to look in, right? And believe that they have some of those unique qualities. And you and I talked about that, and not wait for permission. I think that's the most important thing. And bring men along, right? Engage them as our partners. So any other thoughts around that as an executive, as a woman, and worked in this dynamic in other cases?
I've been through too much. I'm too old. It really is an amazing world that we're going to have the opportunity to change. I mean, it's change. You know, this is a chance. I mean, this is a new beginning for so many things that we can do as we move forward. My clients are looking for it. They're embracing it. We never know in our groups, you know, our groups are pretty broad when we're talking. You never know where the exact great idea is going to come from. And that's exciting because it's coming up. A lot of it's bubbling up. Some of it's top down, but a lot of it's bubbling up, and we're going to be tapping it. And that's very important for the future.
Yeah. So step into the circle now, right? This is the opportunity. I know we're short on time, but one last question. Your world is around communications and during crisis. Can you give us some advice? And even if it's very fundamental, what's the best advice for communication during this transition time through crisis and on the other side?
I have two. One is the Joele Frank Miranda rule. You are entitled to great advice from your lawyers, from your bankers, from the people around you. But everything you say, everything you do will be judged in the court of public opinion. And so right now, leaders are very visible. So that's very important to think about how you're going to be seen. The second thing is a little funny, and everybody steals it from me, which is if it feels really, really, really good, 100% of the time it's a bad idea.
All right. Well, I think that's a great note to end on, Joelle. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you to all the speakers. This was just beyond inspiring. I think we have a great playbook here that I think all of us, myself including, can take back to our day-to-day, both professional and personal lives. So thank you all. In the spirit of time, I wanted to turn it over to Edie for some closing remarks.
I just think we want to say to all the 5 speakers and the 2 moderators, can we just say you've been extraordinary, right? And we've learned so much. We need 90 minutes, not an hour. So from D. Quinn, as you're looking at leading in wartime with great sensitivity, Teresa, who really brought us together with the heart and head alignment, with Damon, with all the things you told us to recalibrate, and your quiet reflections and your empathy and your optimism, which everyone said, including the fact that leadership matters. And Carly, you reiterated that so often with leadership matters, that everyone's connected, that we've got to lengthen our view towards leadership, and we've got to include men to drive the change, which everyone reiterated. And Joelle, for what you're saying about the change of culture and your 2 maxims that are so strong is that you're entitled to great advice and to always get that great advice. And all of you, leadership matters. I think to Robert Reiss, thank you for being who you are with the CEO. Thank you so much to Becky SHAMBAUGH, to our team at WBC. You're incredible. To our board, to our leadership. We need all of us. The next CEO call will have 5 additional CEOs. That's May 19th, and it too is extraordinary and diverse and leaders driving change. Denise Kennedy, who's CEO of Anthology Communications, is doing massive social media. As we said, Robert's doing an article of this for Forbes. We've recorded this because all of us want to re-listen, rethink, as Damon says, reflect, and just say that it's time of crisis. We care about people, as you have said, is Quinn. It's people and product, and all of us will drive that change. I think we're just grateful for your leadership, and we want to hear from you every day of what you want and how we joined in this collaboration, leaders reflecting for action. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great.